Sit up straight. No elbows on the table. Don't play with your food. Don't eat until everyone is served. Don't throw the biscuits. These are just a few of the rules that we heard around the Dupree family table. They were to be strictly observed, especially on Sundays when my grandmother was visiting for Sunday lunch. We all have these kinds of rules: when to wear seersucker white shoes after Labor Day. Like me, I'm sure that you've all experienced the laying down of the law in your families. Every family system has its own set of rules, whether spoken or unspoken. And quite often, the rules are there for a reason. I remember one genteel Southern person once saying, rules, and by rules, they meant good manners, rules are there to keep everyone safe and comfortable. Of course, as I grew older and I began to visit other people's houses and stay over with other friends, I found out that there were different rules in other households. Some people ate dinner with the television on. Some people had a lot more fun at the dinner table than I did. Some people ate pizza for breakfast and pancakes for dinner. And what about the rules of different cultures? Some people eat with their fingers, some with chopsticks, and in some cultures, showing up on time for a meal is considered rude. And in other cultures, a satisfying belch is a compliment. So rules around eating. Though you and I today can laugh at the mystery of our differences, when it comes to food at the time that the Gospels were written, these food laws, as well as many other laws, were a very serious matter. You see, there was a time in Jesus' history when the temple was the center of Jewish identity. The temple was the constant. It was the cultural and religious anchor that determined and directed norms. But then that temple was destroyed, and the Jewish community struggled to hold on to that centrality. And remember that Jesus and his disciples were a part of that culture. They were a part of that Jewish community. So upholding these rules and maintaining these norms is one way that they can hang on to their identity as a people. And that's what's under the microscope today in our gospel. What's under the microscope is the rules and the practices that they keep as a community. And in Jesus' opinion, those religious authorities are taking it just a little too far. The spirituality had been drained from their practices. You abandon the commandment of God, Jesus says, and hold to human tradition. As has happened time and time again with the rulers of ancient Israel, they are losing sight of religion's true purpose, to love God and to love neighbor. And that can happen to us sometimes, can't it? We get so focused on the rules that we can't see the real issues that are staring us in the face, especially today when there are so many rules swimming around out there about what to do and what not to do, about how to be safe and what doesn't matter. But today what Jesus is doing is something that I think is super helpful for us all in this moment, which is to go back to our motivation. What is it that drives us? And what does Jesus point to? The heart. Their hearts are far from me, Jesus says, quoting Isaiah. In the 6th century, Bede the Venerable said that the principal seat of the soul, according to Plato, is in the brain. But according to Christ, it is in the heart. So the heart is the seat of the soul. Jesus is always saying that it is our hearts that must change. But we know that the heart is dangerous territory. And sometimes we don't like to go there. You know as well as I do that it is much easier to stay up here in the brain. Thinking is much easier than feeling. And that's why so many of us are Episcopalians. We love to think. And as a religious and spiritual person, I encourage it. Keep thinking. But as we can see in so many places these days, we need some changed hearts. Because changed hearts lead to changed minds. And changed minds lead to change. So let's face it. Almost like the Pharisees, Episcopalians have a lot of rules. When to sit, when to stand, when to kneel. When to sing, when to put out the candles. I once had a person who would not leave the church until all the candles were extinguished. He'd stay right there just to prove a point. I still remember the tremendous anxiety when we changed prayer books. And heaven help us all when a bunch of clergy get in the same room and try to figure out what to wear. I have seen wars on social media when the wrong person was wearing the wrong thing at the wrong time at the wrong event. And what about those rules governing who we ordain? Or the rules governing who can get married? In every system, there is a handbook. But I dare say that Jesus might say, get over it. Get over it. That stuff doesn't matter. What matters is how we are feeding each other. What matters is how we are caring for each other. Are we trying with our whole heart to love God and love our neighbor? That's what holiness is about. And that's what our religious practices are about. And notice I said practices, not rules. Our religious practices are the rails that lead us to more open and flexible and awakened hearts. Our religious practices, they are intended to be structures that awaken us to God's presence and to our connection to each other, to our neighbor, and to our planet. And if we get them wrong, if some of our practices slip, if we forget to light the candles, which happens more often than you noticed, if our church service doesn't contain everything that you want it to contain, it's not the end of the world. God will show up. Common culture indicated that those disciples were in violation of the law because they were eating with dirty hands. But I would like to admit and submit that some of our most holy work is done with hands that are dirty. Jesus was in trouble because he healed on the Sabbath, which was a big no-no. But for the sake of life and love, Jesus was moving common culture's definition of what was right and wrong forward. Through the work of the Holy Spirit, that movement continues today. Now, most of you know that this past Wednesday morning we lost our beloved brother Fletcher Lowe. And I think it's only appropriate that as we discuss rules in the church, that we mention Fletcher. What he accomplished in his life had he not been moving toward that heartbeat of Jesus. He was a rule follower. He was adherent to his vows. But he was more true to his vows and to the heartbeat that was driven by Jesus. He was less worried about the rules and more worried about the hearts of those who longed for freedom and life, helping to end the death penalty in this state. His heart was in sync with the heart of Jesus. And together, those hearts, Jesus's and Fletcher's, moved us all toward a clearer sense of compassion and justice and freedom. For us, and for our particular religious expression, the Episcopalians, and I don't know why, but it's not everybody's cup of tea, the Episcopal Church. But that work of changing hearts happens around the font, and it happens around the table. Because it is around the table that we lift up our hearts. Right? We lift up our hearts. We don't lift up our minds. We lift up our hearts so that God will change them. It's ironic that the table is usually the place reserved for rules. But at God's table, it's a little different. And if you listen closely, you can hear your own heart align with the heart of Jesus. And that's why we come here Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, to hand over our hearts to God, to get out of our heads where we spend far too much time, and to move into a place of feeling. Our hearts are most completely aligned when we gather around this table with our neighbors to pray and sing and listen and eat. And in a few moments, even in the midst of a strange and growing pandemic, we will all come to this table, and we will lift up our hearts, and we will stretch out our hands. And will those hands be completely clean? Will our souls be spotless? I doubt it. And that's okay. True faithfulness, true holiness is not about clean hands or spotless souls. Following Jesus means that we, like him, get our hands dirty serving others, caring especially for those whom the world has cast aside. True faithfulness is not about clean hands, but clean hearts. Play by the rules. Yes, unless the horse gets out of the barn here, there is a place for rules. St. Paul's. Even in the church. They help us stay organized, they help us with our identity, and they keep us honest, and they keep us safe. And oh, how I wish I could just skate through life adhering to the rules alone. No elbows on the table, napkin in your lap, sit up straight, if it were only that easy. But thanks be to God, we learned today that Jesus has his eye most trained on our thirsty, thumping, uncontrollable hearts. So maybe it's time to ask, how are your hearts doing, St. Paul's? It's been an interesting 2 years, hasn't it? Since we've come together. My heart has beat all over the place as we have sought to play by the rules and also search out the best way for us to be a community. And I know that I have seen your hearts beat all over the place too, wild with joy and celebration, and wild with sorrow and loss. So if you would, with me right now, would you find your heart? And maybe, if you're willing, just close your eyes and feel it connect with every human heartbeat around you. This is the heartbeat of Christ. And you are the heartbeat of the church. And at the end of the day, we have to remind ourselves that our hearts are not ours to control. Our hearts belong to God. So we may as well hand them over. And just take a deep breath now and open your eyes. We hand them over to God. Because that's all that really matters, not our rules and not our egos or even our strongest wants and desires. It's our hearts. We hand them over to God. Oh God, will you treat our heart gently and kindly, we ask. Of course, God says, it is my most precious creation, your heart. So today, as we rise to come to the altar, we hear that song of songs. Arise, my love. Arise, my heart, and come away. Don't worry about your bumpy elbows or your dirty hands or your mishandled mishaps. Fear not, come away. God has your heart. God is your heart. Have a beautiful week, St. Paul's. May your hearts in the hands of the Creator beat wild and true. As it was in the beginning, is now, and forever shall be your heart and God's beating. World without end. Amen.